Before we begin, I'd like to say a few things first. First off, I'd like to thank A-Main Hobbies for supporting this channel. If you guys want to buy the T6.4, SC6.4, or anything else I list in this video, you can feel free to check the link in the description below. Anything you buy using those links will directly support this channel. Secondly, I'd like to thank Servo 3D for sending me this 3D printed charger stand. If you want a stand like this or a different color, feel free to check out the website below, servo3d.com. With that out of the way, why don't we start this video? Even though it wasn't my first video, the first video that I did that really gained traction on my channel was regarding the T6.2, which was released a few years ago. Over time, they have released many hop-ups and factory team parts to make the T6.2 relevant to what the Associated is doing with their B6.3, and more recently their 6.4 models with the two-wheel drive buggies. I had actually planned to get another T6.2 just to race, and I actually had the kit in my hands when I got a DM from one of my patrons that looked like this. So yeah. This is kind of a different idea as what I initially had in mind. So here we have it, the T6.4 in box a few days later after it was shipped. To actually complete this kit, here are some things you're actually going to need in order to complete it properly. 1.5mm and 2.5mm hex drivers, along with a 2.5mm hex driver, 5.5 and 7mm nut drivers, a body reamer, needle nose pliers, shock pliers, a soldering iron, a body paint, a caliper, preferably digital, and all the electronics, wheels and tires, and time. Some other things that will help you make your build much easier we have green slime, a ball cup wrench, a thick boy turnbuckle wrench, and an assortment of fluids of the shock variety. With that out of the way, let's get this thing open. One thing you may have noticed from the get-go is the fact that this truck, much like the short course truck, doesn't come with a body. Now, there are, I imagine two reasons for this. For one, it's to keep the cost down so it's not more expensive than the buggy in which it's based on. The other reason I imagine is the fact that most people run their own sponsored bodies anyway, and tend to throw away the old one. It didn't really make sense to put money into making a new body when it wasn't going to be used. So mark my words, the same will be true with the buggies very soon. Anyway, with that doomer tangent over, why don't we get started with the front end, specifically the steering along with the bearings. Now, there's a lot of adjustability here, and frankly, it can get a bit confusing. For now, we're just going to build the cars that are recommended from the kit. That means putting the bell crank in the low position, and using the 2.5 kick-up bulkhead. Go ahead and put it on the chassis with two 14mm head screws. Congrats, you just completed bag number 1. Oh, and by the way, make sure they set those bearings aside somewhere where they won't go missing or get knocked over. They will be used throughout the entire build. Next bag is bag number 2. Bag number 2 is a bit of an extensive one, including the foam on the chassis, ESC weight, front sway bar, front shock tower, front top plate, servo mount, hinge pin brace, and front arms. One thing I will say about this part is one of those situations where the build will go different depending on what surface you're racing on. If you're on dirt, be it loose outdoor dirt or high traction clay, you can put the parts they give you in the box on the car and you'll be done with it. If you're running on turf or carpet, this is where you're going to have to spend some extra money on some few extra parts. Specifically an ESC, steel weight, and possibly a steel weight as well for the servo. Both of these things are integral to getting your truck to handle well on carpet or turf. For now, since we run on dirt most of the time, we're just going to install the aluminum ESC weight and be done with it, along with the front sway bar included. One thing I will say about the front sway bar though is that I tend to forget sometimes is to make sure they move freely while still being held by the set screws. Another thing to mention about this bag is the new servo mounting system. It's held in directly to the servo rather than to the side guards. Other than that, there isn't really a tip or trick to say. Just follow the instructions and you'll be fine. The same thing can be said for bag 3 as well. Just make sure to use the 4mm steering blocks, the 0% or 0 degree caster insert, and you should be good. Bag 4 is another easy step. In this one we begin to assemble the rear end, including the rear arms, the shock holders or shock standoffs on those arms, and the rear hinge pin system for the C and D block, and their inserts. Now, there's a lot of tuning ability that comes with this pill system that can be a bit overwhelming for newcomers. All you really need to know is that by moving the inserts around and using different ones in the C&D block, you can adjust your rear toe in, kick up, and track width. The kit standard is 3 degrees of toe out and 1 degree of kick up. This means putting the C&D blocks in this configuration and the D blocks in this configuration. With that out of the way, now we move on to the more involved stuff. Next up we have the ball diff. The first step is to put the balls into the diff gear. One way that AE made it easier to build said diff was the fact that they made it to where the diff gear has a top and bottom side. Basically, the way it works is that the side with the 3 dots goes face down when inserting the balls. This way none of them will fall through the little holes on the diff gear. Also make sure to dab a little bit of lube on the balls before inserting them. This video is going to get me demonetized, isn't it? God damn. One tip that I will say about actually building the car after building it myself is the fact that using too much lube is not really a thing you can do. Also, when building a ball diff, make sure you take your time and have plenty of space to make sure you don't actually lose any of the components to the ball diff itself, as they are very easy to lose. Now, there are a couple ways to actually break in a ball diff after you assemble it, but I think the best one that I've seen is by Spencer Rifkin. He did a good video on this a while ago, so if you want to see that, click the annotation at the top right hand corner of the video bar. If you're running on carpet, however, you're going to have to buy some extra stuff again. You see, one of the things that's different about running dirt compared to carpet is the fact that on dirt cars you typically run a ball differential, which this kit comes with, and on a carpet you run a gear diff like you would on a 4-wheel drive buggy. I won't go over how to build a gear diff today, but just so if you're running on carpet, you're going to want to invest in a gear diff and a set of sway bars. Oh, and the ESC trays. Yeah, you're gonna have to get a lot of stuff. Next up, we have a more intricate part of the build, the transmission. Now, I'm writing this pre-kit building, specifically this script, so I'm not 100% sure if this is still true. But the previous T6.2 I built a while ago came with 2 different transmissions, a lay down and lay back transmission. The lay down transmission was meant for very high bite transmit surfaces, whereas the lay back transmission was made for very low grip conditions. These days, on tracks that most people run on the 10th scale world, the lay down transmission will be the one to go for 99% of the time. Now, how do you tell the difference between the two? Simple. The idler gear on the lay-down transmission has a much larger diameter than the one that comes on the lay-back transmission. Also, the trans case has said idler gear much further back on the transmission as well. For this kit, we'll be using the kit-specified lay-down transmission. So where were we? Oh yes, bag 6. Bag 6 includes the aforementioned transmission, transmission case, chassis brace, slip assembly, rear shock tower, and rear body mount. Even though there's a lot here in the number of parts, don't be intimidated as it really isn't hard. Once this part is done, you'll start to see the end in sight as the truck will look more complete. The same thing can be said about bag 7. The only real thing I can say about this part is to raise the hubs by +1 like Dustin Evan does in his T6.2 setup to generate a little bit more mechanical rear grip. Other than that, this part isn't too difficult, if you follow the instructions to the letter that is. Apply black grease where asked to, don't over tighten the hex screw too much, and the same thing for the rear hinge pin. If you made it this far both in the kit and in this video, I both commend you for sticking through it this far, and thank you for watching this long. However, I must tell you we're in the harder parts of the kit now. However, I will also say once these are done, you'll feel much more accomplished before. So let's get started. Bag 8 involves the turnbuckles. In my opinion, this is probably the most painful part to do if you don't have the proper tools, which I usually don't. However, there are some other ways to make building these a little bit easier. For one, there's a chapstick or black grease method of lubing up the threads so they're easier to actually thread onto the ball cups themselves. In this example, I'm going to use black grease included in the kit. If you don't have a ball cup bridge, however, this car can be a bit of a blister-inducingly painful. However, if you happen to have a hex driver, which if you made it this far I hope that you would, you can just insert the driver into the hole in the ball cup and use that as a fulcrum point to turn the ball cups around instead. It may not be the ideal method, but it's better than cuts on the side of your fingers. I also highly recommend grabbing one of these. This is a digital caliper, and it makes measuring how long your turnbuckles need to be that much easier than just eyeballing it or using a ruler, especially for the ones that you need to adjust your toe. The last thing I want to say about moving on to the shocks, or before moving on to the shocks, is to make sure that the little notch on your turnbuckle right here is on the same side throughout the truck. Just easier to know which way you're going when you set your camber. Now, I've built and rebuilt these associated shocks so many times I could probably do it with my eyes closed at this point. And if you've built any other AE kit before yourself, you probably are in the same boat. So I won't spend too long talking about how the shocks are built. What I will do is talk exactly about why AE and a few other companies like Schumacher have decided to go with 13mm shocks instead of 12mm. To put it plainly and shortly, they handle much better on very smooth tracks, like smooth clay and more specifically AstroTurf and carpet tracks, which are becoming more and more popular as time goes on. As for any tips or observations I have for building the shocks, well, this is one of those parts where you don't really want to rush, otherwise your shocks won't handle properly. Take your time, invest in a shock stand or just make your own, and go from there. Once those are done, the car will almost look complete. And now, the complete truck. And that is building a T6.4 in an amount of minutes that I'll figure out later. If you enjoyed this video and would like to see more of it, or just like my channel in general, feel free to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Also, if you had some criticisms with the video, go ahead and put them in the comment section below, as I do read all of them. Also, if you want to support the channel further and want to see teasers as to when my videos are going to come out, or just want to get a set of stickers, feel free to subscribe to my Patreon where you can do all of those things. Speaking of which, I'd like to thank my patrons Michael Williams, RC World Discord server, Casey Nix, Ben Reeves, Dave Armstrong, Joe Jenkins, Rob Bedingfield, Caden Merks, Ian Petrie, Keith McDonald, and especially Morrison Watt. Well, I guess the only thing left to do now is to get this thing on the track. I'll see you there.